Hi, everyone. Sam Eckmann for Gold Derby, joined by two of TV's top cinematographers here. We have Adrian Peng Correia from Nobody Wants This and Kyle Wullschleger from Only Murders in the Building. To start off, I think I would love to hear just about the cinematographers who inspire you. Like, who gave you kind of the creative inspiration to get behind the camera? Is there someone you look up to?
Oh, go ahead.
It's a good question. I think I I have played so much in the comedy world. I came from as a camera operator, and I love comedy. And I feel horrible in that I don't know a lot of the names of these people that do these comedies. To be honest with you, one of my favorite movies is Hot Rod, and one of the reasons I like it so much is because the cinematographer on that did such a wonderful job of framing and allowing the story to happen in these frames and letting the camera be both just a beautiful observer, but then when necessary, an active participant. Same with like Shaun of the Dead, and these movies that really utilize the camera almost as a character at times are some of my favorites. So that's kind of where I'm at. But I'm so bad at the names.
Well, I mean, I've done a lot of comedies recently as well, and it's funny, but it's like when I think about cinematographers, like I saw this documentary, Visions of Light, a long time ago, which is one of the things that first told me that cinematographer was actually a job. So like I that's the names come to me because literally they were just being basically just read off to you during this documentary. And I basically used that as a reference point for the beginning of my career. I specifically look for the names attached to those projects and basically try to learn. Obviously they're all the classic guys like Gordon Willis and Conrad Hall and but a lot of my early references were like classic Hollywood people like Ted McCord and Lee Garms, even John Alton, because his book Painting with Light was a huge deal for me. But I always dug Owen Roizman's work because I spoke earlier about the nature of being a chameleon. And Roizman was always true to himself in terms of the way he photographed anything, whether it was um, French Connection or I think he did The Exorcist. I don't know if I'm going insane, but he also shot stuff like Tootsie, and it's funny that they all have this or Marathon Man. They all have this very specific aesthetic for Roisen's work, but then he always kind of played it very naturally. So even something like Tootsie, which is like traditionally thinking of like an almost absurdist comedy, has this real kind of similar, not rough hewn, but has a very realistic style to it. There's not like a huge amount of embellishment, and I always try to bring myself back to that, even when I'm dealing with something that's really stylized in terms of color like nobody. It's so, I would probably say at the end of the day, now that I'm 51, that when I think about the North Star, it's usually Owen's work because of the simplicity and the truth. And that's another thing I've gone to is I've tried to become simpler, not just because of the nature of TV production, which obviously Kyle can speak to, as well as the nature of trying to institute your artistry over very truncated schedules and budgets and whatnot. But
Absolutely.
yeah, but simplicity ends up working best, I find. And when I look at somebody like Roizen's work, it's always ends up being something that's inspiring to me about how he did things in such an economical way and still made it feel really elevated and cinematic. So I'd say Roizen at the end of the day.
I like that simplicity. One of the things I really like about both of your series, to me, they both have such a strong sense of place conveyed through the cinematography. I could look at a still from either of your shows and know like this is New York, this is LA. How much does the place, the location of the series inform your whole process? What does that feel like for you?
Yeah, for me, I think so much of what we do is on a stage, like but that place, that building feels so like New York, in part because we have awesome production designer. I mean, that's a huge piece of it for me. And then when we do leave the building, which is rare, but when we do leave, um, we're not always able to like go exactly where we want to be in New York. And so you're sort of like depending on a location scout and all that kind of stuff to really make sure that like, all right, this isn't exactly what we want, but let's find this piece of it that does read and feels like it's going to tell that story as best as possible so that you maintain that feel, because it really is in Only Murders, New York is a character in the show, and it informs the attitude and everything else about all these characters. You know, like it really is the backdrop in more than just being a setting.
Yeah, and Kyle, shooting in New York, like perfect example is like that's why I really like the aesthetic a lot of in terms of the work ethic a lot of New York cinematographers bring is that because of hot zones and the fact that the city's pretty jaded in terms of not caring that you want to shoot your
Certainly.
shows. Yeah, it breeds in those cinematographers who are shooting New York this not this idea of compromise, but like what do I have? What can I use? And how do I use it in the best way to tell the story? So the improvisational, anticipatory, and this kind of problem-solving nature of cinematography while still being artist in New York shooters,
Yeah.
specifically tied to Kyle's work in the show, that speaks to it. And that's kind of what I brought to Nobody in Los Angeles because it's all practical locations. There's no set work. And that also ties into an aesthetic that was kind of born into me by Local 52 and 600 do this lighting workshop every once in a while. They haven't done it in a while, or at least I haven't seen it in a while. And Lisa Wygand ASC did this whole thing about hard ceilings and why they're so important. It was it was like a mind-blowing, mind-expanding day about why hard ceilings are so important. And she just illustrated with the use of camera and lighting because it doesn't manipulate, but it gives you parameters to try and fit cinematic lighting in a practical location. And ever since that thing, I've always asked for hard ceilings. And if you're shooting in practical locations or you're shooting a place in New York where you can't manipulate certain things, it forces you to be artistic with what you have. And that breeds in you speed and decision making. And that became a big part of what Nobody was like, oh, we can't do this. What can we do? We're going to be in this restaurant. We can't look this way. What are we going to do? We're going to be in this house. I can't tent this house, or I can't manipulate or save highlights in the background. What corner can I shoot into? And I'm sure Kyle can illustrate with numerous examples, not just as a cinematographer, but an operator, trying to find the frames in practical locations around New York and in cityscapes where you tell the story as cinematically as possible and not shoot the same things over and over again because everybody's seen New York and Los Angeles in these shows. So, locations play a big part.
I know you both have tackled all the episodes of your season, which is, commonplace these days for TV storytelling. But there are instances where multiple cinematographers kind of take on different episodes. Would you ever want a collaborator? What would you like or dislike about that kind of process of divvying up the work?
I'll say I very much wish I had a collaborator. It's Only Murders is awesome in that we're able to accomplish what we're able to accomplish, and some of that's because we're so much on a stage. Um, but to miss out on prepping with the directors throughout the season, my prep is limited to lunches and a weekend here and there is sort of the worst. And so I think if given the opportunity, um, and I am so much more of a collaborative filmmaker in the first place. I want to walk into a space, and if nobody has an idea, I've got 10 for sure. But I want to walk into a space with my gaffer and my key grip and hear what their thoughts are too, and like knowing that whatever we combine is going to be come up with as a combination is almost always going to be better than my singular idea. But yeah, to have a additional cinematographer just from the standpoint of getting more time with the directors would be phenomenal. I think the truth is, like, in some ways I feel that way as you get through the middle episodes of Only Murders, where we do something a little bit more reactionary, which is a skill set in its own. And I would hope that for people watching it, you don't feel that as much. But um, with the first and second episodes, that's where my prep gets to go to. I get brought in a couple weeks before we start shooting we really shot list and get to very much do the proper prep on those first couple episodes. But from there, it becomes a little bit more reactionary filmmaking, and I prefer to be a prepared filmmaker.
Yeah, my next show is I will have an alternate. I've had the opportunity in a couple shows to have alternates, and it does allow you the breadth. It allows you to also, if you haven't worked with a director, it allows you to form some type of shorthand and some type of relationship where you understand their taste, as opposed to them showing up on set or just having a lunch with them, or maybe even a coffee or a drink after a night of shooting, where you're always kind of drained anyway. Is just trying to find like some type of vernacular that when you get on set, they know that you've got them, and they understand the way you're trying to work and your methodology of the show, because they're trying to adapt to that too, especially if they're a guest director and it's the first time. So having an alternate allows you that breadth to be able to kind of form relationships, understand. And certain directors, like, they might want to shoot close-ups in a different way. They might have their own methodology and idea about what focal length communicates the best thing for them. And you might be like, well, our actor really looks best on a 40, and they're like, oh, well, I really like a 28, 2 feet from them. So it gives you the time to be able to kind of like jigsaw together your ideas and jigsaw together your sense of taste, and make that fit in the show, so you don't have this kind of drastic separation between artistic intent of one person and the show at the same time. So, and if you have, and also if you get to choose the alternate, or you get to work with someone you're really close to, oftentimes if you have a friend you haven't seen in a long time and you get to shoot a show with them, it's a really great thing. And when I got to shoot Walking Dead in Florida Man with my friend Wes Cardino, who was my operator on Nobody. And it's just a really great thing. And that's a fertile ground for anybody out there as a student, is especially in television, is like, operators, when they bump up, almost always have wonderful success as DPs, because they know exactly how to collaborate. They know exactly how to like tune the set in a real way. So your operators are invaluable resources in that way. So yeah. Sorry,
You
diverted a little
mentioned,
bit there.
not at all, because you mentioned something that sparked a question here, is that the multiple directors that often come on in a series, I would imagine that would be so difficult to, there's of course a showrunner who's overseeing, but a new director comes in, has their own rhythm, their own wants and desires, way of working. What are your ways of kind of diving in and fitting into that rhythm on such a short notice?
Yeah, Adrian, how many directors did you have on Nobody Wants This?
We had two episodes per director per block, so we had five.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's the
yeah.
same for me on Only Murders this season, at least. Yeah, it's difficult, especially when you don't have the alternating DP. At the same time, Only Murders has a few directors that are returning, which is, it's kind of great that you can know that, okay, we're getting back to somebody who knows the show and knows the rhythm of things. But one of our new directors this season was Jessica Yu, who did episodes 5 and 6, was that found footage episode. And she's such a collaborator that, like, almost within the first hour of talking to her, because our bit of prep that we did have was a phone call, if I'm remembering correctly, or maybe a lunch, like we were talking about. But pretty quickly you're like, oh, this person's coming in incredibly prepared, and there's nothing to be concerned about, and it's a very supportive environment that way. And then, like, if you do need to make a late night phone call, or they're making a late night phone call to you, it's something then that you're going to be able to handle. It's not that big of a deal. The flip side of that is, yeah, when you have somebody who you don't know at all, and maybe they're insecure, nervous, whatever, I think it's the opportunity to step up and stand strong, and know that there are some things you can fall back onto for the show. And I think sometimes you have to, like, an example that comes to mind from season 3 is we had a director who said, like, well, let's just shoot this scene handheld. And Only Murders, really, like, we established, kind of from Chris Teague, the original cinematographer, that there's almost no handheld in the show unless it's for a flashback scene. And the only time we did some handheld this season was for the Meryl Melissa McCarthy fight scene. So, like, only if it's really, really driven. And the reason that this director wanted to do handheld was just to save some time. And so I kind of got to lean on the show and say, like, we just don't do that, and maintain a a cinematographic choice that just made sense for the show still, to keep that style and sort of lean into those things that like are established by the way we do things.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. You could use the show as the backbone, as basically the bedrock in the Bible that kind of dictates a lot of those things. And it depends on your director too. Like some directors are really into camera, really know how and want to use it. And some directors are just concerned about the human condition and may end up
Yes.
wanting you to do the heavy lifting in terms of the way cameras implemented, and you really, and again, like, because you don't have the prep time, especially on like half hours, which you're shooting every episode, like you kind of really have to be ready on your feet as a cinematographer to be able to attack those things. That's why the prep is so precious. But also having a firm idea of what drives you as a cinematographer in the storytelling of those series. Those are the things you can fall back on, is that bedrock of how you've instituted the language visually, and then what actually can work for you. So it really does depend, because there are some directors who have, like, if you have the language of the show, like in Murders, like then you can really kind of like anchor yourself to that in a way that like feels true to the show and still allows you to be artistic. And then if you have a show that's a little bit more free flowing, like Nobody, you can just kind of like you can kind of just be hot wired to the emotional quotient of the scene, and you can implement camera that way as long as it feels right. And sometimes it really, really works, and sometimes it might not feel particularly right. But it's like those are the kind of things as a cinematographer you kind of have to know immediately, whether it's in the context of rehearsals or just in the way that your director is coming at it. Now, if you have somebody like Jessica Yu, who's maybe the smartest person I've ever met, because I did Quiz Lady with her. I mean, the most
Oh yeah.
prepared, brilliant woman, brilliant person, almost frighteningly so in terms of how incredibly intelligent she is, and then calm at the same time. Yeah, I mean, then you're lucky, because it's Jessica's awesome. But yeah, it's just funny. It's a lot of personalities, and you have to be malleable, and that's why a lot of people like cinematographers are kind of even keel and are able to kind of keep that calm blue ocean aspect of production, because it can't be a little bit crazy in terms of meshing all these egos and storytelling kind of
Absolutely.
perspectives.
That's such a good point too, is kind of to remain unflappable in the presence of different personalities and egos and everything else, like to have that sense of calm and knowing that people can turn to you, that you're not just going to feel like you're in a blank space yourself all of a sudden, that people can turn to you because you know that you are the backbone of the show because you are there the whole time.
A lot of spoons. A lot of spoons in the pot. Yeah.
And some of these things, like the multiple directors, the issues of prep time, they are kind of specific to television work. What is it about TV, this long form storytelling, that appeals to you, that speaks to you, maybe versus a filmmaking on a movie?
I think for me, I've in part, I caught the TV wave as an operator, and it really became my wheelhouse. I've only operated on a couple films even, and so I really do know the TV world so well. And I think that yeah, there's a pace to it that is exciting and fun, and when it all comes together, it's so gratifying, and still to be able to leave your identifying mark on it, or have, even if it's not something that people at large are recognizing, it's a little bit of that artistic uh satisfaction for yourself, knowing that like, oh yeah, I can walk into a room and I can figure this out real quickly with the help of a team, and we will make something really wonderful, is satisfying. Now that said, I would love to do a film and to prep things thoroughly throughout the whole thing, and have the time to really figure out how to tell the story as best as possible before you ever bring a camera on the set. Like that would be wonderful to do. But I'm sort of, I've marinated in the TV world, and I'm sure I will keep working in it as much as possible.
I think, it's like I came from the opposite side of it, which was like I had made, like, I think it was 26 or 27 films. all under million, like all very, very small, which is actually the most fertile and perfect ground to actually prepare you to shoot TV because you don't have the money, you don't have the time, you don't have any of the resources. You usually have crews who a mix of people who are experienced and a mix of people who are like don't really have the experience but are super eager. And in television, you kind of have to move so quickly, and that's really about those anticipatory skills and the problem solving stuff that we spoke about a little bit earlier. You know, like I developed that shooting a lot of those small movies. Whereas like Kyle probably developed a lot of that stuff on shorts and then operating on shows as well in terms of being able to see problems ahead of time, be able to cut things off at the pass, and it's that helped me. And then at a certain point, I made a conscious effort to move to TV because I just saw the fact that like there were so many interesting stories, there were so many interesting opportunities. And around 2015, I remember talking to my agent being like, I think we should move to TV. And then I just happened to get a couple of opportunities, whether it was Glow or American Princess with Genji Cohen and Jamie Denbo or Rami. And then it just kind of sat in these universes where I was reading these golden era TV scripts and being like, wow, this is really incredible. This is really incredible. And then just getting that bigger kind of toe into television production. And at a certain point, it becomes self-sustaining, especially if you have a good relationship or you have a good reputation. And they're like, this is a person who shoots really well because because you're there all the time, every episode, like Kyle was saying, like they know that you can steer the ship. They know you can keep
Yeah.
everything above water and get it to the finish line. And that becomes a huge deal from predatorially speaking. So that's when, television just ends up having these kind of long form, these bigger breaths, these longer, interesting arcs for side characters that sometimes might not get the time in a feature film. In television, they end up getting usually their own episode or like a moment, and you can see it with shows like The Bear, when like all these characters get like interesting little side arcs, like in episodes like Honeydew and whatnot, where you can follow a character down a slight rabbit hole and it still feels within the context of the universe. And that's a really interesting, freeing thing to be able to tackle in TV. It allows you not just shoot a show, but to shoot all these different kind of avenues of all these different kinds of stories and people. So there's incredible breadth in that. So it's a really
Yeah.
interesting and fertile ground for storytellers.
And TV has become more filmic. I think the expectation is to make it. We on Only Murders, we do not light overall. We are lighting per setup and like still trying to make it look as cinematic as possible.
It's
And
got great mood.
like I really try and take that and make sure that stays as a consistent part of what I'm doing, so that we don't just get too flat and make it look general, just so we can move fast. We still move fast while making it look as cinematic as possible.
And making those stars look great because they look awesome. So well done.
Thank you. Yeah.
But it's
Yeah,
like, yeah, but you have to deliver that too. It's like you
yeah,
got to be
absolutely.
you keep the mood, keep it cinematic, keep it comedic, but they got to look great. And it's funny.
and make Meryl Streep look great. Exactly.
Yeah, but it's kind of like the old Hollywood studio system in that way. And there's a reference actually back to Visions of Light where they talk about the stars and they're like, have all the shadows you want, have everything happening around them, but keep the shadows off their faces, or basically keep those stars looking beautiful. And that's the great thing about being a television cinematographer in a lot of ways, is that you can have all these different choices and you have all these different safeguards and parameters in terms of how you have to structure things as well. It is an interesting thing to navigate artistically all the time.
Yes.
And Kyle does a great job on that show. So
Thank you.
yeah, you're
Well,
welcome.
they both look great, both of these series. So thank you both, Adrian and Kyle, for this great conversation. And everyone watching, make sure you check out Only Murders in the Building and Nobody Wants This. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
watching, guys.